So, first question, I'd like to know, what are the top trending stories in finance at the moment? And could you talk about some of the stories that you've covered this year so far?
So I think that the stories, or rather trends that I see coming from last year, and probably we're going to focus on those stories in the upcoming year as well, are the aftershocks of the ESMA restrictions. So obviously ESMA restrictions changed the industry from end to end, and we even at this point we cannot even assess the influence of the ESMA restrictions on the industry. But we already see some aftershocks and some very serious implications. So, for instance, brokers going offshore, whether canceling their European licenses or establishing new entities offshore to funnel clients through there. A more general trend that we see for brokers that still don't know how to cope with the situation is declining volumes. It's something that is really worrying the industry, and we see it across the board. Obviously, we examine those numbers on a daily basis. Also, an interesting trend that we see is perhaps the movement towards APEC countries. Australia, China, not always an easy task, but some brokers see it as I wouldn't say a safe haven because they have their own problems, but they see it as a way to cope with the growing regulatory problems in Europe.
Yeah, but then that's really going to arise there anyway. You're going to have your own restrictions over there too, so...
That's also something that we see. Actually, today we published a story about ASIC, the Australian regulator, becoming more and more involved and demanding more from brokers, for instance, with regards to data disclosure. So I think that this trend will also continue. So obviously brokers will find a way. Entities, places like Malaysia, perhaps China to some extent, will be locations that brokers are going to focus on.
All right. Okay, so if we're talking about content, what kind of articles, in your opinion, generate the most interest? And could you also maybe go into details, maybe the most controversial person that you've interviewed to date?
Okay, so for the first question that you asked, I think that following the notion that I started, I think regulation would probably be the top topic that we focus on and is of interest for our readers. You cannot overestimate the interest of brokers and service providers in this field. We see that every once in a while when you have either a fine or obviously when you have a new regulation coming up, we see a huge spike in traffic, and obviously brokers are very worried about this.
Of course, yeah.
So about your second question, personally the most interesting person and the most controversial person that I interviewed is someone that I don't even know who he is or she is Bitfinex.
Okay.
It's basically a blogger, an anonymous blogger that was active on Twitter and on Medium, and he or she published a lot of stories and a lot of theories about different things in the cryptocurrency sphere, and obviously their focus was on Bitfinex, the crypto exchange.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of claims raised there, some of them perhaps not so true now in retrospect, but some of them raised some solid questions about solvency of cryptocurrency exchanges, stablecoins, a topic that's going to be interesting this year as well. So that's definitely something that was interesting and is still relevant, up to date.
That is interesting. Anything you can elaborate on? Any theories that come to mind?
I would rather not repeat those theories because he's in a lot of trouble for that, so I would not repeat that.
All right. Okay. Next question. So obviously everyone knows how popular Finance Magnets is in the Forex industry. In your experience, when it comes to advertisers versus promotional material versus competitions or trading, what kind of material doesn't resonate with your readership or resonates?
So I think personally, and again it's only my personal point of view, I'm not a marketer, but I do see the marketing industry from my perspective. I think that the best practice is content marketing And when I say content marketing, I don't mean blunt promotional stuff.
Yeah.
I mean true substance and things that are of value. I think that our readers, especially our readers, are very intelligent and they're very sophisticated. So if you want to catch their attention, you need to be sophisticated as well. You need to
Of course.
Share valuable information, and you need to disclose perhaps some data as well. So I think that's the most efficient way of communicating with your potential clients.
Yeah, I understand. So from your perspective, from a content standpoint, are there any particular articles or themes that you'd like to see covered? So if we take technology, is there anything that hasn't been given the spotlight that it deserves?
So I think that during the last year or so, you see quite a big spike in the involvement of brokers and other financial firms in AI and machine learning and all the other buzzwords. For some, it's just a buzzword.
Yeah.
But for others, it's actually a path that they choose to walk on, and they invest a lot of money in it. And this year, we're going to see some very interesting products with that regards. And I think that we're going to put the spotlight on those technologies, definitely.
That's great. It's funny because everyone always says blockchain is a buzzword, but I mean, even in my role, I've been able to explore different ways that blockchain can be used. That's actually nothing to do with the buzzword. So from a tech standpoint, I completely agree with you. So
I'll tell you what, blockchain, from the perspective that we see now, when so many projects went into blockchain that didn't really need blockchain.
Yeah, they didn't need it. Yeah.
So in some cases it's a buzzword. In other cases it's actual valuable technology that really promoted some industries. So it's a case by case basis.
Yeah, I agree. All right. So what about data? How do you think financial institutions leverage their data into great content marketing?
So I'm a big believer in data. So this cheesy sentence that says that content is king. So data is definitely the queen, definitely, because at the end of the day, financial institutions, financial companies, service providers, they need to share some numbers and to show their performances. And again, buzzwords and superlatives no longer do the job. I'm a big believer in data. By the way, it's also something that we employ in our work. We try to work a lot with visualization, infographics. We have a very strong, you mentioned my role, so aside from being head of content, I'm also responsible for the intelligence department, which is basically produces data and generates data about the industry. And I'm a firm believer in data, and I think that financial firms can and should use data for marketing purposes as well. Yeah,
it's a really interesting combination, actually. I wasn't quite, some people don't really delve into the intelligence side enough, so.
Yeah.
All right, okay, so if we talk about Finance Magnets as a brand, why do you think it's so prominent in the financial industry?
So I'm gonna be honest with you. I've been with Finance Magnets for 4 years, and from the get-go, I was really impressed by the foundations of the company and the status of the company in the industry. The company is a very serious hub that is growing and expanding, and obviously it has a lot of connections in this industry, which is not should be taken for granted, because this industry is not very transparent.
No.
And getting news in this industry and getting information is not an easy task. But I think that the relationship that we have and our credibility, if I may speak about my own craft, I think that definitely places us at a spot that people believe in us, people know that we employ the utmost ethical standards, and therefore they enjoy reading us and enjoy sharing information with us. Yeah.
Okay. Great. It's funny you say that, because I mean, this whole series, our whole new interview series is all about exposing what's going on in the industry and how we can better and strengthen the market, and just, I suppose, separating ourselves from other firms that don't necessarily talk about what's actually going on. So on that note then, in your opinion, what do you think can be done to squash the gimmicks and tricks that have for so many years plagued the financial industry and true transparency?
So I think that one of the biggest problems in the financial industry currently, and more specifically in the cryptocurrency industry, is basically the use again of buzzwords and of general statements. I think that a company should just state what it does and its advantages. Okay, if you have a very fast system, if your system is cheap, if your system is credible, if it's very stable, just showcase your benefits and advantages, and don't talk about very general statements of different superlatives of seamless and all those other buzzwords being used. Showcase your advantages if you have advantages, and I believe that it's the best marketing practice out there. Obviously, when you integrate this in great content that is of value, as I mentioned earlier, I believe that this is the solid way to build a clientele.
Okay, great. All right, so we have one final question. It's a bit out there, so basically we want to know if there was one person that you would interview, dead or alive, who would that be? Over a dinner or a drink or whatever you want.
I think that I would definitely interview Margaret Thatcher.
That's a good one.
Yeah, she was, I think, one of the biggest influencers on modern economy. I mean, after all, she has an economic theory being named after her. So I think that could be a fascinating conversation.
Yeah, actually, for sure, that would be. Great, okay.
Which could happen.
Yeah, I know. Thank you so much for your time.
You.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you.